and let's get started. You know what we're gonna what I'd like to do is because I lost our place a little bit with Dr. Anderson. I would actually like to hop into page 76. Okay, and this is the chapter in Black Labor, White Wealth, called "Why Whites Chose to Enslave Blacks." And if you recall, see, this is the thing, right? We assume that we were just enslaved because we just got unlucky. We assume that we were enslaved because that was the plan all along, and that wasn't always the plan, right? Capitalism and the racist version of capitalism, which is pretty much what they had in Europe with feudal, the feudal stuff and all that. I don't think they really were caught up in the fact that that they were going to pick us because we were black, right? Now maybe later on, being black became connected with the stigma of being in a lower socioeconomic class. But at that time, I believe they would have enslaved anybody. I mean, if you look at the history of Europe, you see white people enslaving white people all the time. If you look at the history of Asia, you see what the Chinese were horrible to the Japanese, who might have mistreated the Koreans at one point, right? So being Asian doesn't mean you're all on the same page. If you go to parts of Africa, you'll see where some people in parts of Africa look down on people in other parts of Africa. If you go to South America, we all know Hispanics are not the same, right? Somebody from Cuba is gonna see the world differently from a person who's from Mexico, who sees the world differently from somebody who's from, say, I don't know, Venezuela or Puerto Rico or Colombia, right? So effectively, the thing that you want to think about with this particular chapter in Black Labor, White Wealth, page 76, I'm going to start here. But in this chapter in general, they talk about, he talks about the differences between the slavery that black people experienced in America and the slavery that had traditionally existed. I think that's one important differential that's worth exploring. And and then also he talks about why black people in particular were selected for slavery. And then also in this chapter, which is really good, and you can get a copy of this book if you haven't gotten it. You should go to powernomics.com and get copies, and maybe get copies for your loved ones as Christmas gifts. I mean, it's better than buying them something at Walmart. He also talks about the different churches and religions that were responsible for enslavement. He talks about the role that the Catholic Church played, the Muslim religion, what role they played, Protestants and Baptists. And on page 75, there's a nice little table where Dr. Anderson does a comparative analysis of ancient enslavement and colonial black enslavement. So ancient enslavement is where he says basic rights of the slave were honored. In colonial black enslavement, black slaves had no rights. In ancient enslavement, the Catholic Church accepted slaves as humans and intervened on their behalf. So they would intervene with them as humans. In colonial black enslavement, most religions supported black slavery and intervened on behalf of the slave holders, offering biblical justification. So they used the Bible as a weapon to keep black people enslaved. And also, they would intervene on behalf of the slave owners. That's why if you look in the history of the United States, if you remember, reparations were paid to the owners of the slaves. In fact, I think Larry Elder, that guy in California, actually said that slave owners should have got reparations or something crazy they said. I think he just says crazy stuff to get attention. Can't nobody be that ridiculous. But then again, it's life. The third thing, in ancient enslavement, slavery was viewed as a temporary and unfortunate social condition. So you were enslaved for a while, and then you had to come up. Life got better for you. In colonial black enslavement, slavery was permanent and inherited. In ancient enslavement, governments did not use their powers to exploit any racial group for private wealth and power. In colonial enslavement, European nations and colonial powers conspired to manipulate and enslave blacks in order to develop the New World and colonize Africa. He says in ancient enslavement, slave ownership was viewed as a status symbol and a measure of the slaveholder's existing wealth and power. In colonial black enslavement, Dr. Anderson argues that slaveholding was usual as an essential component of capitalism. It empowered even the poorest white to acquire wealth. So this is where, when you make these arguments about reparations, there really is no debate. There is no debate when it comes to reparations. It's a lot like, where climate change has gotten. Like, the climate change debate is over, right? So the reparations debate is done. The wealth of America. I think what is it? What's our GDP? What, 22 trillion? I can't remember what the total wealth in the country is. I could have sworn, for some reason, the number 180 trillion comes to mind, but that seems so high. But I got to double check that. But that massive amount of wealth in America, a big chunk of that was built on the backs of Black people. So we're owed a large percentage of that money. Also, Dr. Anderson says that in historical ancient slavery, slaves were mainly debtors, prisoners of war, or victims of religious persecution. So if you lost the battle, you became the slave. And he says in colonial enslavement, Black enslavement did not result from financial indebtedness, war, or religious persecution. Blacks were enslaved because they were Black, and that is it. Ancient enslavement said inferiority stigmas were never permanently assigned to either the slave or his racial group. So there was nobody who said that, because you're a slave, you're inferior or you have this stigma, which I don't know. I'd be curious about that. Or at least not be because you're in a certain racial group. In America, in colonial slavery, the skin color of the Black slaves was sensationalized and made into a badge of degradation and permanent inferiority. So they turned Blackness into a brand. Tell me if you know what I'm talking about. They turned Blackness into a brand, and I was explaining branding. If many of you run businesses, and so with businesses, you have to understand branding. And by the way, blackmoney103.com, that's our entrepreneurship program in the Black Business School. Attorney Nicole Compton teaches that. So if you're interested in going and take a look, just go to blackmoney103.com. We have 6 parts to the Black Money sequence, so feel free to go visit that. And the thing about branding is that I was explaining that to a kid, and I said, well, think about high school, right? In high school, kids had reputations, right? You had the cool kids, right? Maybe the captain of the football team and the head of the cheerleading squad. And a lot of times you see the captain of the football team dating the head cheerleader. You know what I'm talking about. And then you maybe had the smart kids, right? Maybe you had the bad kids, the ones who were on their way to prison one day, right? They sit in the back and smoke cigarettes or whatever it was, right? That's what it was in my generation, right? Maybe you had the outcasts, the nerdy kids, right? So everybody had a brand. And so if you remember that, anybody remember that Nick Cannon movie where he, I forgot what it was called. Love Don't Cost a Thing or something like that, where he wanted to be one of the cool kids. So he paid the popular girl to go on a date with him or something. Is that what it's called? Yeah. He paid the popular girl to date him. So all the other girls would want to date him because that would create what is called brand association. Brand association is where you pay someone to connect your brand to their brand. And then next thing you know, you're benefiting because you're associated with each other. So, and he became one of the cool kids, and then he kicked her to the curb once he became cool and popular, right? Well, Blackness became a brand. Blackness became a brand in America. We were branded, not just, physically, but we were branded in a way where the perception of who we are is affected. And that brand lasts to this day. To this day, there are people who won't go near Black people unless they're coming around to exploit us or do something stereotypical, like get us to tell them a joke or get us to play some basketball or get us to teach them how to rap or teach them how to, wear a certain hairstyle or whatever. But they won't, certain things they won't do with Black people. Like if you tell them, hey, this Black person invented a rocket that's going to take you to Mars, well, they won't believe that, right? Because they're like, well, Black people don't do rockets, right? Or this Black person is going to be your financial expert on CNBC. Well, they don't believe that because they don't. That's why they don't have many Black people that are on TV as financial experts. In fact, all the years that I was now remember I was the only Black man to get a PhD in finance in 2002. In that year, there was no other Black person on the planet who got that degree, and I was on CNN probably 100 times. And do you know that not one single time did CNN ever call me to do anything financial? Every time CNN called me, it was always something racial. The first thing they knew about me was that I was Black. That's it. That was like, oh, we have this racial controversy about, some race riot in Milwaukee. We'd like to bring you on, Dr. Boyce, to talk about it. And I remember just kind of saying, well, my PhD's in finance. Like I can do what the white guys do, but it wasn't associated with that, right? My brand was on my skin. And so that's another reason. That's another problem you have in terms of in a lot of areas of society, but one in particular might be Black-owned businesses. Black-owned businesses are victims of massive amounts of discrimination because not only do white people not want to be connected to Black-owned businesses, but even a lot of Black people don't want to be connected to Black-owned businesses because even those who mean well, who are not trying to be evil and racist and bad, have been conditioned to see Blackness as inferior. right? The black guy, he's not going to do it as well. Or they go to a black business. They say, no, look at how we always mess up. Look at how we do things wrong. That's why I don't like our businesses. Every time we run a business, this happens, right? So that branding is something that has persisted through time. It still exists to this day. And I think it's very important to be conscious of that so you can kind of confront that. Okay, so moving on. Let's see here. In ancient enslavement, slaveholders were allowed slaves to retain their racial identity and dignity. In colonial enslavement, the blacks were psychosocially conditioned to despise themselves. Racial disunity was rewarded. So in colonial slavery, it was very strategic to make you hate each other, to make you not want to be around each other. And so, as we're trying to reverse some of that brainwashing process, that's why I specifically let you all know that the Be One philosophy means that we understand we must be one in order to be successful, right? We must identify blackness as a type of excellence. Be One children are going to be the ones who are going to take the lead. They're by definition, being black means that you and your children are trained at least on the basics of economics. You understand the value of ownership. You understand the value of investing, which is delayed gratification. You understand the value of economic independence and accountability and intelligence and all these other things, right? And we get pushback on it, but I don't care. People think it's uppity to say that that I want black people to be intelligent. Well, what's wrong with that, right? There are so many other groups out here that identify themselves with intelligence, and you have too many people that make you think that being black means being ignorant. And I think that we have to be conscious of that and reject that, because what happens then is if you have associated the brand of blackness with ignorance, then you'll have intelligent people acting ignorant so they can fit in. How many of y'all see that? How many of y'all see people on the internet, online, who are really smart people who could be doing really deep, intelligent stuff, really meaningful stuff, but they hide that because people make fun of them. They say you're acting white, you're being uppity. So they start, next thing you know, they're doing the milk crate challenge, or they're doing the drop, what was that challenge? Was it the bus it challenge, or whatever it was, where you're shaking your butt or whatever in front of you, just stuff like that, right? Like ignorant stuff, because you're like, well, gosh, if I'm too smart, then other black people won't accept me. They're going to reject me. So I'm going to just be ignorant and act like a kid, even though I'm 45, 50 years old. And I just I think that's a little bit of a problem. I kind of want to be a grown man. I don't want to be 50 years old pretending like I'm 17. Like, that's not fun for me. It's very awkward and it looks really stupid. So let's keep going. All right. So slavery, last part, ancient enslavement. So the slavery provided wealth and limited benefits directly to individual slaveholders. Colonial slavery, in that case, slavery provided wealth for nations and institutions. It empowered an industrial revolution and brought modern capitalism to Europe. So those are some of the differences between ancient slavery and the slavery that you experienced in America. And Dr. Anderson does a very good job of highlighting the difference. Now, what he then talks about on page 76 of Black Labor, White Wealth, that's the book we're reading. And anybody listening online, if you want to join the book club, you can go to blackkeystogreatness.com. You also get free access to my life class, lifetime access. It's not going to be there forever, but feel free to go to blackkeystogreatness.com. And I'm going to shut off the live feed in a minute. So if you want to join us, you can go there. And so here's where he talks about why Indians were not enslaved. And this is really interesting because remember, they could have enslaved the Native Americans. I mean, they were already here. They've been here 1,000 years or whatever, right? And I know Africans came over, but I don't think we were as prevalent at that time as the Native Americans were. And so you would say, why not just enslave the Indians? They're already here. Why would you bring people all the way across the ocean when you got people right here? You could lock them up and make them do your work or whatever. So here's what Dr. Anderson has to say about that, which is, I thought, quite fascinating. He says, since a favorite device for minimizing slavery and its impact on blacks is to counter that Indians were treated even worse, it is important that a comparison be made between the differences or similarities in the treatment of blacks and Indians by the dominant white society. Historical and contemporary facts show that blacks were treated differently and worse in most respects. These differences concern degrees of degradation, cultural acceptance, government assistance, and reparations. As examples, during the 2.5 centuries that blacks were enslaved and being worked to death, Indians were free to move about and resettle. They carried weapons and defended themselves. The government established Indian bureaus that built and financed the national system of tuition-free schools that required the Indian children attend. The bureaus provided them with food, clothing, housing, and farming tools. They were given back millions of acres of land upon which they could construct homes, farms, or businesses and never pay any form of taxes. They were never stripped of their culture, religion, or sense of history. They were free to marry someone from any race or ethnic group. Many states, such as South Carolina and North Carolina, encourage marriages between white males and Indian women. Indians contributed to the development of the nation through a non-personal loss of title to millions of acres of land that millions of their people died trying to hold on to. But Indians had an option that blacks never had. They never carried the social and psychological burdens of having been enslaved. All of the five civilized Indian nations were black slave owners and slave traders. So a lot of times you don't learn this in school. I don't give me a yes or no if you were taught in school that that a lot of the civilized tribes, Indian tribes, owned slaves. I mean, did anybody else know that? I was always kind of taught that we were kind of in the same boat and our experiences were similar, and that's just not the case according to Dr. Anderson. Now, I don't think that we can say that they had it easy though. I was just in South Dakota, and there's a lot of social problems in a lot of these reservations where Native Americans live, and my heart goes out to them. It really does. But at the same time, I think it's very important to understand some of these differences. Because when you look at, for example, land ownership and the casinos and all that, that explains Dr. Anderson's decision to file that lawsuit that he's been funding himself. Again, all these celebrities that say that they love him, they haven't been writing checks to help him do this, but he filed a lawsuit on the 1866 Indian treaty, basically claiming that blacks are owed millions of acres of land. I mean, according to Dr. Anderson, there's a lot of land that should be ours, and he's been personally funding this lawsuit by himself. So that's why if you want to know why I'm pushy about saying, look, if we love this man and we're reading his books and gaining so much from him, let's at least go on his website and buy books, for our families and for ourselves, for our friends and stuff like that, because you have to spread these ideas like a gospel. Like, I really believe that. I believe you have to be intentional, and I have no problem saying, come on, people, let's do it. Let's support this man. Support him as much as you support Walmart and Target and Kmart and everything else. So Christmas is coming. Maybe we show our love to Dr. Anderson's family and his legacy by buying books and giving them away to the family. At my wedding, when Alicia and I got married, we had a Powernomics wedding. Everybody at the wedding, I did not take gifts from anybody. I said, I do not want a gift. We're going to give you a gift. I gave everybody at the wedding a copy of Powernomics, right? Because I know that's the kind of gift that's going to keep on giving, because that's going to allow you to grow into whatever you want your legacy to be. All right, so let's keep going. So he says, let's see. Let me dig in. Okay. Here's an interesting thing. He says, worse, all of these Indian nations supported and fought on the side of the South in the Civil War in fear of losing their black slaves. Unlike American Indians, blacks had few, if any, options. As slaves, blacks' freedom and liberty were taken from them. They were confined by laws and chains, could not carry weapons, and were the primary targets of hostile Indians. There has never been a government agency established solely to provide them with assistance. It was unlawful to teach a black to read and write, even nearly a century after Indians were attending free schools. When schools were finally built, they were separate and unequal. Blacks were forced to finance their own schools and pay tuition to non-black schools. They were denied the right to acquire free land or to this day purchase land in certain areas. Blacks have received no reparations for their centuries of personal physical abuse and stolen labor. They sought 40 acres and a mule, but received neither. They were released from centuries of servitude, penniless, naked, ignorant, hungry, and landless. They were legally defined by quantities of blood, and every state enacted laws that forbade blacks to marry and commit sexual unions across racial lines. It was a capital offense for a black man to approach a white woman. Blacks were separated from their culture, history, religion, and family. Lastly, blacks continue to bear the scars and legacies of their inhumane and unique experience in American society. Still, the great difference in the treatment of blacks and Indians does not answer the question, quote, why were blacks selected for slavery over the American Indian? Both blacks and Indians had darker skin color than the white Europeans, and both practiced non-institutionalized forms of religion, lacked firearms, and were accessible for enslavement. The same factors that dissuaded Europeans from enslaving Indians in Latin and Central America also dissuaded European settlers from enslaving the Indian population in North America. Settlers being on Native Americans' land were at a significant strategic disadvantage. The American Indians were fierce warriors whose behavior the white man could not predict, and they rightly feared retribution from free tribesmen. Moreover, from an economic standpoint, enslaving American Indians was not a good investment. A runaway Indian slave could skillfully find safety and blend into the wilderness. As with the white indentured servant, the strong disadvantages made Indians unsuitable for slavery. Although Indians were conquered, the white conqueror had a certain degree of respect for Indian culture. A basic principle of American Indian culture was a willingness to fight and die rather than to be enslaved. They also had an inclination to exact revenge upon their enemies. This determination and strength impressed white settlers. Now let's dig into that for a minute. And I'm about to dig into something that's a little controversial, and I hope I can talk about this and still be loved. Does anybody remember? I'm not in any way justifying everything Kanye West has said. But I think that there's some nuance. Anybody remember when he made that controversial comment about slavery was a choice? Now I'm not here to convince you that it was or was not a choice. I really am not. I promise you, I'm not trying to do that. Because it's already dangerous enough, weird enough to go into this territory. But what I want you to do is think about how so many people instantly reacted to that remark. Like, how dare you say that? That's absolutely not true. There's no way that could have been true. You're out of your mind. What is wrong with you? How could you say that? That's unbelievable. Right? Now, I'm not saying that you're wrong for feeling that way. Right? I mean, because, it was an impossible choice at the very least. Right? You had a choice. Right? You did actually have a choice, but it was just a really hard choice. Right? Because there are some people, like, I'll give you an example. If someone came into my house and said, Boyce, we're about to do terrible things to your daughters and your wife in front of you, and unless you choose to die, which would you choose? And I say, well, you know what? You can do whatever you want to my daughters, because it is somebody says, why would you let them do that to your kids? And I say, well, because I had no choice. Well, no, other people might challenge me on that, right? They might say, well, actually, Boyce, you did have a choice. They put a gun to your head. They said, you can either let this happen or you could die. You could have chosen to say, I'll just die for this. I don't care. And because that, I don't know about you guys, but that's what I would say. I would say, look, I'll die before I let you hurt my kids, right? So I think that there were people who kind of looked at that Kanye statement in that way. I don't know what Kanye was thinking. I told you guys I talked to Kanye one time. It was a really interesting conversation. He's a very interesting person on the phone. And we talked for 12 minutes, and then he had to go, and I had to go, and that was it. I do not know this man, but I know a little bit about. I studied Donda's life. Donda's his mama, right? And when I see the apple, I look at the tree. And Donda was a freedom fighter. She was a person that was a very strong, intelligent kind of woman. And so I can see I can see little Donda come out of Kanye a little bit. And again, but this is not me advocating, or what's the word, endorsing Kanye, because we all know he's a little bit weird sometimes. But I will say that if you were to ask me what I think about this, and you read this statement that Dr. Anderson said, the Indians knew that slavery, for them anyway, was a choice. Like, okay, you can try to enslave me if you want to, but I'm going to choose to fight you until I'm dead. You can try to enslave me if you want to, but I'm going to choose to do anything in my power to not let that happen. You can try to enslave me if you want to, but I'm going to choose to wait until you and the missus go to sleep at night, and I'm going to go up in your house and I'm going to cut your throat, right? And the thing is, though, remember that there were black people who thought this way too. There were black people. There have always been. We're not the first brave, intelligent black people to ever live. Our ancestors were just like us in terms of capability and potential and sentiment, probably stronger than us. So those warriors existed. You had those black men and black women who did die on the plantation, who were willing to do what needed to be done. The Nat Turners of the world. But and there's a reason why you didn't learn about these people in school. There's a reason why they will expose certain types of black people to you, but sort of hide away others. You don't want to get the slaves riled up. You're still a slave. Like, you're still, to some extent, it's more psychological and more economic, but you're still a slave, right? If you don't have freedom of choice, then you're still kind of a slave. So there's a reason why in the 1960s you hear about all the civil rights superstars, the John Lewises and the MLKs, but you're not that teacher isn't going to really tell you about what Dr. Claud Anderson was doing in the 1950s and 1960s and people like him. Right. So I think it's important to understand that we always have a choice. Like, you always, no matter what you're dealing with in life, you always have a choice. And if you don't ever feel like you have a choice, ask yourself, do I really have a choice, or have I convinced myself that I have no choice? Right? Because getting a person mentally to the point where they believe they have no choice, that's a kind of slavery in itself. If I can get you to the point where you are completely convinced that you have no choice other than to do what I tell you to do, well, then to some extent, I have made you a slave because I put you in a position where you feel like you have no freedom. And what is slavery? Slavery is when freedom is missing. So when I have no choice, I am not free. That means you've not only enslaved me physically, you've actually enslaved me psychologically. So always remember, you've always got a choice. Again, I'm not talking so much about Kanye's statement anymore. I'm talking about just in general in this life. You've always got a choice. So let's keep going. Out of respect for them, many whites. Now, by the way, I'm on page 79, reading from Black Labor, White Wealth. You can get a copy of the book at Powernomics.com. That's Powernomics.com. And I'd be remiss not to remind everybody, don't forget the All Black National Convention is happening October 29th. We are gathering about 40 to 45 really intelligent Black people from all areas of life, experts from relationships to health to economics and everything else. This is the Brain Trust, and we're bringing them together to plan the future of this community. We're planning for the next 200 or 300 years, and these people are amazing. And so if you want to learn more, you can go to allblacknationalconvention.com. We'd also like to hear your ideas, because a lot of you have great backgrounds. You have a lot of intelligence. You have a lot of skill. And we just want to put all the ideas on the table, because you can't convince me that thousands of really intelligent, dedicated Black people can't be smarter than anything that's out there. We are our own university. We are the Black version of what Harvard is for white people. So let's get together. Let's solve these problems, because they are solvable. Because remember, we always have a choice. So allblacknationalconvention.com. Go ahead and reserve your hotel room and everything, and get that knocked out, because we're almost out of hotel rooms. Okay. All right. So let me keep going. Out of respect for them, many whites learned the American Indian languages and cultures. There was considerable cross-cultural contact, with white settlers often boasting of being blood brothers or having Indian blood in their veins. That's interesting. When I was just in South Dakota, I stayed in this hotel called the Hotel Alex Johnson, and I saw this proud white man in a painting from 1929 on the wall, and I said, "Is that Alex Johnson?" They said, "Yeah." And then they had another picture of the same proud white man, and he's wearing a full head of Indian dress, right, like a chief. And they said that Alex Johnson was so connected to the Indians in South Dakota that he was a blood brother with a chief, and that was apparently a big deal for a white boy to be a blood brother with a chief. So this is interesting that this sentence is here, because that's literally what Alicia and I saw this weekend when we were in South Dakota. All right, so the nation further honored Indians by enshrining their likeness on American coins and institutionalizing their cultural contributions. Dominant white society's respect for the Indian was so great that an Indian image symbolized the nation before it was replaced by Uncle Sam. The white settlers had no such respect for African people or culture. They did not respect Africa, African languages, religions, or Black culture. Table 3 compares the pros and cons of indentured white servants in Indians and African Blacks. Apparently, there were fewer advantages for enslaving whites than any other race. In fact, the analysis indicates that the darker the skin color, the more attractive the group was for bondage. Slaveholders and traders quite likely used this criteria in making decisions about who best to enslave. They decided that enslavement of powerless Blacks carried with it far more pros than cons. Backed by European religions, laws, and social customs, a national public policy in America developed that identified Blacks as the chosen people. So on table 3, he does a comparison of enslavement factors for whites, Indians, and Blacks. So he talks about reasons. It looks like on one side he has reasons to enslave, and then he has reasons not to enslave. For indentured whites, he said the reasons to enslave them was they constituted an available labor pool. Also, they voluntarily contracted themselves into servitude. The reasons not to enslave them, though, was because they were perceived to be a member of the same master race as the slave owner, and also they had rights, entitlements, including freedom pay at the end of the contract. Now, the pros for enslaving Native Americans was that they were not white; they were considered heathens. They were also poorly educated, poorly organized, and had no wealth or technology. Now, the cons against enslaving American Indians were that they were respected by the colonists as a conquered nation, not as individual slaves. Also, escapees were familiar with the wilderness and they could blend in with non-enslaved Indians. So Native Americans were tough to enslave because they would escape and they could blend right in and get away, whereas Black people didn't have all that. Now, with Black people, here are all the pros of enslaving them. And he literally, on the side where with the cons, it literally says none, 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 none. So there's literally no cons. Like, you were the perfect slave. You were literally in the views of, or in the eyes of white Europeans, you were the perfect slave. So he says here that sub-Saharan Africans were the best slaves because they were called Negroes. Blacks were not considered citizens of the country. Skin color and features made them highly visible and prevented escapes. So your black ass can't blend in with nothing. Their mother country did not seek retribution on the colonists. So nobody from Nigeria or Ghana or anybody came to say, come get you. They didn't say, hey, we're going to declare war on you because you took our people. There's nobody looking for them. It's like that little kid that goes to school. You ever notice that? I don't know if you ever noticed this. Let me give you a little secret. The kids that go to school who are most likely to be abused are the kids who don't have anybody advocating for them. If they know that mama and daddy are not going to show up to the PTA meetings and not going to raise hell when they put little butt buck in the class for kids that are learning disabled or whatever, then they're going to just do whatever they want with your child, right? That's why you being involved, and good parents in here can testify to this. You being involved and you letting them know that you're present will lead the teacher to treat your child differently because they know somebody's watching. People always behave differently when they know somebody's watching. They know who they can abuse, who they can't. Pimps know who they can target, who they can't target. So with black slaves, when you were brought over here, and you are unique, you have African roots, sure, but you were part of that group that was brought over here, put in the slave dungeons, and also your ancestors survived all of that. There was nobody looking for you. There's nobody checking for you. You had no advocates. You had nobody that would say, hey, we're going to come declare war on you. Whereas if you go to England and you grab a bunch of British people and you pull them over to another country and make them slaves, well, the British government is going to send that whole damn Navy fleet and take your ass out, right? So that's why it's very important that we understand the importance of having advocates and protectors in the community. And this also really importantly extends out to the men. When somebody comes in to do terrible things to black children, are the men there to say, you're not doing this, not on our watch. No, this isn't going to happen, right? That's extremely important, right? So this is what he's saying. He's saying that you had no advocates. There was no country that was going to come looking for you. So you were kind of the lost tribe, the lost children, so to speak. All right. So he also says that another pro of enslaving blacks was that tribal chiefs routinely enslaved and sold their fellow blacks to foreign traders. Also, African agricultural work patterns made blacks more suitable to agrarian plantations. Next, Africans demonstrated a greater willingness to adjust to slavery than Indians or white indentured servants. So again, you were the perfect slave partly because you can become comfortable in slavery. And that's still true to this day. Like the frog, they say the frog, you put the frog in the cold water and you turn the water up slowly and it starts boiling and the frog just chills because he's just used to it. Well, a lot of things that we experience as black people, in my view, to this day, we just become accustomed to it. We're used to knowing that being black means you're going to be less comfortable, that you don't have as many rights, that your life doesn't matter as much. That's why you had to have a whole Black Lives Matter campaign, because a lot of black folks needed white people to tell them that their lives mattered, for them to actually believe their lives mattered. If white people didn't say it, then it doesn't matter. And then there's a whole class of black people who said, I don't really care if white people say Black Lives Matter because I know that my life matters, right? So a lot of that's a self-esteem issue. It's about knowing who you are and being comfortable with that. All right, so moving on. The white settlers had no such respect for African people or culture. They did not respect Africa, African languages, religions, or black color. Undoubtedly, much of the disrespect that many whites hold for people of African descent stemmed from black people's compromising disposition and willingness to accept endless abuse and enslavement. Their unlimited compassion, patience, fears, concern for others, and physical endurance were signs of mental weakness. My God, they're talking about every election since, for the last 50 years. Every election, we forgive. We are the quickest forgivers, aren't we? We kind of forgive anything, right? Remember when Dylan Roof shot up all those black people in the church, and the people from the church showed up at the courthouse and were screaming, "We forgive you, we forgive you." Like right at like the smoke, the gunpowder wasn't even cooled off yet from the gun where he shot up all those people, and they were already trying to forgive him. Like, that's a mental illness. Like, something's wrong with you. Like, that's not, there's nobody else that I've ever seen that forgives that quickly. That's weird. That's very weird behavior. So we got a lot of weirdos in our community. Let's just keep it 100. We got a lot of weirdos. So we got to kind of deal with that. All y'all need therapy. Oh, me too. All of us do. All of us need some therapy. That's why, again, at the convention, allblacknationalconvention.com. I hope you guys will come out. We literally have about 7 therapists that are going to be there that are ready to serve and to help you in any way that they can. All right, so let me see. Next, not all blacks were submissive, but for those bold enough to bolt from the plantations, their dark skin color was a highly visible target in a rural or urban setting, making it nearly impossible for an escapee to hide and elude capture for very long. Most blacks who did escape successfully were unfamiliar with the surrounding wilderness and consequently had to seek shelter in an urban environment in the northern states or Canada. Federal and state governments enacted fugitive slave laws that required white citizens, bounty hunters, and Indians to recapture black slaves for rewards. All of the other racial and ethnic groups rank above blacks in acceptability in America. It is likely that blacks would not be so vilely disrespected if they had fought harder against enslavement. What Dr. Anderson is saying is that when you don't fight, they don't respect you. When you constantly bend over and take it and bow down and give up and constantly forgiving everything anybody does to you, it leads to a tremendous amount of disrespect that they have for you. And there's very few examples of this greater than when you talk about politics and how and this weird thing with the Democratic Party. Um, there's another example might be when you're talking about the fact that anybody and everybody can come into your community and set up a business and start making money and act like they owe you nothing at the end of the day. And it's real weird because we were never, whatever it is other people have that makes them protectionist about their resources, makes them say, look, you can't come in our neighborhood. We weren't given that as children. I don't know what that is. Maybe it starts, I don't know if it starts at church. I don't know if it starts with media. I don't know if it starts with school. I know personally as a quote unquote radical black man, I've always been seen that way, right? I've always been the guy who spoke up a little bit more than others. I do remember the stigma I would get from whites. Whites were typically afraid of me, and black people were also afraid to be around me, right? When I went to academia and I was teaching at Syracuse University, and at that point, when I finished my PhD, I felt like I had an intellectual superpower. I mean, I could process information and take things in, and I knew things, right? So to me, it's like you're not gonna run the okey doke on me. Like I'm gonna fight you. And I remember being around a lot of other black PhDs who were just scared, like scared of everything, constantly scared. And I think that fear somehow that fear is injected in us very early. And I think it's very important that we become conscious in confronting that because that fear is part of what leads others to not respect you. So let me keep going. Most blacks who did escape successfully were unfamiliar with the surrounding territory. Federal and state governments enacted fugitive slave laws. We mentioned that. All of the other racial and ethnic groups rank above blacks in acceptability. It is likely that blacks would not be so vilely disrespected if they had fought harder. Okay, we mentioned that. African blacks who did protest enslavement did so silently, jumping to their deaths from slave ships rather than fighting to the death. So those are the slaves who felt like they had a choice. Groups that were willing to fight to the death were considered difficult to control or defeat in battle, and worse, were not wise investments because slave masters could not control, defeat, or trust them. There is no available documentation that indicates that white slaveholders ever seriously considered importing Asians or Hispanics into America as slaves. By the 1660s, European settlers had turned almost exclusively to blacks for their slaves. It is clear that there were conditions or characteristics associated with each ethnic or racial group that either encouraged or discouraged their enslavement. So what Dr. Anderson is saying there is that, with capitalism, I don't think that they cared what color their slaves were. I don't think that they said, okay, we only want to make money if we're allowed to manipulate and exploit black people. I think that exploitation is kind of a, race neutral concept. But there was something about you and your situation and your thinking that made you an easy target. You were a mark, basically. Your people, our people were, right? So I think that a lot of this can be translated to modern society. I think there are a lot of areas where we find ourselves continuously exploited in certain ways, and even enslaved. And the question I think we can ask ourselves is, what makes us a mark, and how do we not be the mark? How do I let them know, like, look, I'm not that guy. We're not. No, we're not negative. You find somebody else, right? So I think that's really interesting. So Dr. Anderson does something here on page 80. We're reading Black Labor, White Wealth, and on page 80, he refers to a hierarchy, a global racial ordering of colonial oppression, and he orders different groups based on how they were oppressed. And so he says, although European oppression of other peoples was widespread and occurred on a global scale, it had differences based on skin color. The oppression of blacks has always been uniquely different in kind, intensity, and scope from discrimination against Asians, Hispanics, or Indian groups around the world. Table 4 lists some of these differences. The table illustrates the apparent criteria and ranking factors used to oppress peoples of different color, as well as the benefits and results of each group's enslavement. Those people closest in color appearance to whites were oppressed less. Though these color gradations and other physical characteristics have been reflected in America's immigration policies and laws since 1790 and help to explain why some cultures are more acceptable to whites than others. So right now, you've got Haitians trying to get into the country. That's different from Afghans coming into the country because Afghans are whiter, Haitians are darker, right? So this is not new. This has been going on for a very long time. So let's keep going. So let's see here. Though Japanese and Chinese, for instance, did face some discrimination at certain periods of history, they are generally more acceptable than blacks, especially in some of the more racist and oppressive countries of the world, such as South Africa. So he talks about the Asian community, and he describes them as a group that has large, complex civilizations of yellow-skinned people. And he says the techniques employed to oppress Asians, where colonial powers imposed a numerically small superstructure upon existing civilization. Good rulers were allowed to maintain a great deal of power. This technique enabled the colonial powers to exploit the people on the land and allowed Asian culture, language, and family structure to remain intact. In North America, he says that the population characteristics are thin, separate populations of brown-skinned people called Indians. And the techniques they used for Indians were the colonial powers confiscated land, killed and forced natives onto less desirable land called reservations. This allowed colonial powers to exploit the land and pass ownership and wealth to their heirs. Native American culture and heritage remained intact and were enshrined into U.S. coinage and national culture. Now, for Africa, he describes that population as separate pockets of black-skinned people. And the techniques used to control Africans were colonial powers imposed total control by colonizing, exploiting land, people, and resources for centuries. Colonial powers executed mass displacement of people and accumulation of wealth. Their actions destroyed families, culture, history, and sense of community by exporting blacks for global slavery. African blacks have suffered from two types of peculiar institutions: American slavery and international colonial oppression. Many societies established their customs and treatments of blacks based on the patterns set by European enslavers. Consequently, blacks have been subordinated to the lowest level in every nation and society. The socio-psychological impact of centuries of slavery, abuse, international colonization, and exploitation is cumulative, but the full impact is yet to be determined beyond the human devastation that is visible in black communities and countries around the world. The psychological and sociological implications of slaveries, of enslavement of blacks, and international colonization of black countries are mind-boggling. Blacks were raped of their wealth, culture, language, religion, human capital, and humanity, and not permitted to bond for 4 centuries. Blacks now have little, if any, foundation for rebuilding and competing in a new world order that demands sophisticated skills, tools, technology, wealth, power, and group unity. Blacks have been assigned to the lowest level of ethnic acceptability in America. This could explain why other racial and ethnic groups have been able to outperform them. Other groups do not carry the psychological, sociological, and political burdens that blacks bear. So your situation was unique, right? This is what I'm gathering from this. And this is something that I think we have to be very conscious in terms of how we process this and how we kind of think about what it means to move forward. And so let's go back and read this a little bit. I'm going to stop here and actually look at that last paragraph a little bit so we can dive a little deeper into this. He says blacks were raped of their wealth, culture, language, religion, human capital, and humanity, and not permitted to bond for 4 centuries. So look at those things: wealth, culture, language, religion, human capital, and humanity, and not permitted to bond. So when you're talking about things that we're processing, with our team of experts, as we prepare for the convention, we're thinking about these key areas. Obviously, wealth is a thing, right? And it's not as if we have nothing to work with. We have some of the greatest wealth experts in the world right in our community. We have, so many educated Black people. I'm educated, but I know a lot of other educated people. And I believe that the goal right now, the objective right now, is we must be intentional on making sure that we spread those ideas to as many people as possible, so that that wealth barrier is not there anymore in terms of knowledge. The first step to accumulating wealth is to understand where the money is and how it works, and then you can go get it. Right? We're very good at going to get it once we make that decision to go get it. Culture. I think building a culture around the things that we value, the things we believe in, family, community, respecting women, taking care of our kids, building our community, owning things. That, those are basic things that can be infused into the culture. But again, you have to be intentional about it. Language and religion, I'm going to leave that alone for now, because I know we have people have different religions, and that's fine. Human capital. We must reclaim our human capital. Most of our human capital comes from our labor. Our labor is typically sold to other people and is sold cheap. That connects to culture. You must eliminate the culture that teaches Black children that the best thing for them to do is to grow up and work for a white man. Because what you're effectively doing is you are indoctrinating them into this idea that their human capital should be given away cheaply, which contributes to the racial wealth gap. Student loans contribute to the racial wealth gap. Doesn't mean you shouldn't go to college. My son goes to college. I visited him this weekend. I'm happy that he's there. But we're very intentional about making sure that he gets more than he gives, right? That's the idea. That's the key idea behind any investment. Moving on. Humanity. Well, the humanity part, I think that's up to you to give that. I think humanity largely comes from just knowing who you are, right? So that's where teaching our own history becomes very important. This is why I did the book club, because it's like, hey, let's create our own superheroes. Dr. Anderson to me is a superhero. He gets more respect than any white man I've ever met. So we're going to make that happen. We are the school system. We are the school system. If we have a platform that reaches 1 million people, why can't we be the school system? So at that point, that humanity, sort of knowing who you are and valuing who you are, and really knowing on a deep level that Black Lives Matter without white people telling you that on TV, that comes from just knowing what you represent, what legacy you're carrying. There's a great song I encourage everybody to check out. It's really, really good. Victory Boyd. You guys know Victory Boyd. Victory Boyd is B1. She's part of this community. She's super famous now. She's signed with Rock Nation, and she was supposed to sing the Star Spangled Banner at the opening game between the Dallas Cowboys and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That was a big opportunity for her, and they took it away because she refused to get the jab. Her family, for religious reasons, they don't believe in getting all that stuff, so she didn't do it, and they walked away proudly with their head held high. Oh, well, Victory has a great song that I really think should be considered to be not a replacement, but a supplement to the Black National Anthem. And it's a song, I want to say it's called Who We Are, or something like that. The chorus is, this is who we are. This is where we came from. This is our people. This is our struggle. Go listen to that song. Go listen to that. In fact, I'm going to look on my Spotify, because I listened to this song, and the first couple times I heard it, it literally brought me to tears. It was that extraordinary. And I bring this up because little things like that, like I talk to Victory's father all the time, because they've got this. It's called Who I Am. Who I Am. I'm sorry. The song's called Who I Am, and it's on her last album. I think the album's called Victory. If I'm looking at it, I think it's called Victory. And anyway, I talked to her dad a lot, and because her father did something a lot of Black families should try to do, but haven't been able to do successfully. He got 9 of his kids. He had 9 kids, and all 9 of his kids work together. They all run the same family business together, and they're all very successful together. They got signed by Rock Nation. Jay-Z heard them sing and loved it, and so they're doing really well. And I said, this is the kind of stuff that should be taught, to everybody, right? How did you do that? Because how many? I don't know how many of y'all go through that, where you got just these relatives where you see amazing potential, but they're running in every other direction, mentally and physically and financially, to the point where all your energy is scattered and splattered. So nothing gets accomplished. Things get destroyed. Nothing gets built. You're running like a hamster in a cage, and you don't understand the importance of keeping those resources together. So that loss of human capital, Black people, I guarantee you, probably lose $10 trillion every generation just from depletion of black human capital that is given away to white corporations that make white people rich. So don't just understand, white people don't just get rich from what they do. They get very, very rich from what you do, because you are as much of a contributor to their wealth as they are. So just keep that in mind. All right. So you know what? There isn't much else. I promised myself we do about an hour. And I hope you all will give me 1 second and allow me to let you all know about something we got going on in the Black Business School if you're interested in taking a look. Today is the last day to get a 48% discount on a commercial real estate masterclass that we partner with Herb Strather on. Herb Strather is out of Detroit. He's a very good friend of Dr. Claud Anderson, and he has done over $2 billion, pay attention, with a B, $2 billion worth of commercial real estate deals. So Herb knows what the heck he's doing. Again, these are the master teachers in our community. I have a tremendous amount of admiration for Herb. And so Herb has agreed to partner with the Black Business School, which it's better at Black wealth than Harvard, Yale, Stanford. None of these schools does what we are able to do and works with the people that we work with. So Herb Strather, the guy who did $2 billion worth of deals, is now doing a complete masterclass on commercial real estate, how to buy commercial property for your business, things like that. Today is the last day to get the 48% discount, and then it goes back to the regular price tomorrow. You're still welcome to sign up. It starts on Thursday. If you'd like to join, we got a URL for it. It's basically we put the word Black on stuff just so that, because we like being Black. And so if you're interested, you can go to blackcommercialrealestate.com. That's blackcommercialrealestate.com. So feel free to go to blackcommercialrealestate.com if that's of interest to you. It's a lifetime membership. You have access to the content for the rest of your life. And believe me, Herb is about as good as they come. You're going to have to search high and low to find anybody that's done $2 billion worth of deals. So that's something that we have going on right now. Feel free to go take a look. And of course, you guys know about the convention, October 29th. If you have any ideas on things you'd like to see at this convention or any others, we're wide open for that. When you come down, I'll shake your hand. We'll talk. I don't care if it's a pandemic. I'll shake your hand anyway. And give us ideas, give us thoughts on how we can do things better. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go upstairs. I think my wife cooked dinner, and I think an hour of this intensity is good enough for all of us. It gives us enough to think about. The book is Black Labor, White Wealth. You can go to Powernomics.com if you'd like to get your copy. And again, I just want to implore anybody that if you got it like that, if you got some extra money, Christmas is coming up. I hope you'll go to Powernomics and like literally shut down the website and buy books for your friends and family and community, because I think that's better than any Christmas gift you can give them. And also doing things like giving your kids shares of stock for Christmas and stuff like that. Those are the types of gifts that I want you to get accustomed to giving, because you want to give something to them that's really going to change their lives. You really got to move the damn needle. So that's it. That's it. So when I'm talking to you, if it looks like I'm acting a little weird or I'm getting a little passionate or whatever, it's because I'm always thinking when I'm talking to you is, how do I move the needle? How do I really get you to hear what I'm saying and buy into that idea and at least consider doing something that's going to elevate your life and elevate your family, because this is your chance. One day we're going to be dead. And we won't be able to do anything once we're gone. So right now, this is our moment, our time. Let's go kill it. And I want to do things at a level that 200 years from now, they're going to be talking about what we accomplished in this generation, because in my mind, you are the chosen people. So God bless everybody. It was great to see you. I hope that this was helpful to you. And I'm going to go eat me some chicken. I love you, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.